Okay, example 3 and 4 will illustrate the more difficult technique. So the more difficult question will involve square roots, will involve squaring all this. Okay, so I'm using example 3a to illustrate the technique of squaring both sides. So I'm using this to show the technique of square both sides. So when do you use square both sides? You will square both sides when you got some amount of square roots. Okay, so you will square both sides when you got some amount of square roots. Don't be surprised, sometimes you will see more than one square root. Okay, so anyway, in this case, right, you only see a huge square root. So if I square both sides, I will be able to remove the square roots. So if I square both sides, I will be able to remove the square roots. And don't forget, what's your objective? Your objective is to make C the subject. So don't forget, this part shouldn't have any C. Okay? So okay, before I continue on to show you cross multiplication to make C the subject, okay, I'd like to bring your attention. If let's say you got a question like this, and then there's a 3 here. For some students, right, they will be like, so what do I do with the 3? Some students will be thinking, what do you do with the 3? Okay, it's not a cube root. Okay, maybe I change to a 5. Okay, it's 5 times a big square root. Okay, so what do you do with the 5 there? So some people will be like, I don't know what to do. Or some people simply take it as this is inevitable. So a lot of people will do nonsense thing, especially when they don't know what to do. So the correct technique should be, you observe the idea. This is a multiplication. So if you would like to get rid of the 5, you should divide by 5 on both sides. Okay, so you should have this idea. So if you want to get rid of the 5, you should have divide by 5 on both sides. So go ahead and divide by 5. Then you go and square both sides. So if your huge square root comes with a number, you got to get rid of the number first. It's easier if you get rid of the number. Then you go and square. And if you square, do remember to square the top and square the bottom. And then you proceed with your cross multiplication. Okay, so that is when there is a number outside a square root. Okay, because it's a multiplication, you should divide both sides by that number first. Okay, so otherwise, I'm going to continue this question. So I'm going to continue this question with cross multiplication. So those people who will, there are some students who will get confused. So many alphabets. Yeah, there's a lot of alphabet. Stay very focused. You do your technique. After you do your technique, keep checking for your subject. So you realize that every line I will keep checking for my subject. Okay, so every line I'll keep checking for the subject. Okay, so right now I got my subject on the left. I also got my subject on the right. But the one on the left is hidden in the bracket. So logically speaking, I should expand out. Okay, so keep checking your subject. They are still not on the same side. Okay, so by right, you should bring everything to the left. Sometimes, right, if I see that this is a minus, I will prefer to bring it to the right. Okay, so frankly speaking, I'll bring it to the right. Then I'll bring this over. Okay, I'll bring the minus 2a squared c to the right so that I get a plus. So sometimes I don't like to see too many negative signs. So I rather move it to the other side. Okay, once I move it to the other side, then I can rearrange them. I can rearrange them. The right side becomes your left side. and the left side becomes your right side. And this part that has gotten your subject, I can factorize. So take out common factor. And in fact, I don't even want to take out 2 as a common factor. I just want to take out my subject as a common factor. So I gotten this, divide the bracket over. So at this stage, right, this can be your answer. Or if you feel like factorizing, just go ahead and factorize. And that can be your answer. So just do a check that your answer doesn't have C. Okay, so what is the whole technique involved here? You need to square both sides. You need to do this to get rid of the square root. Okay, and also just now I mentioned if there's a number besides the square root, you need to divide the number over first. Okay, then back to cross multiply, make to take out common factor. So just in this question alone, right, we got quite a lot of technique. Squaring both sides, cross multiply, and take out common factor. So in fact, this one is worth quite a lot of marks. Typical ones will be, average one will be 3 marks. Sometimes more than that, depends on the complexity of the technique involved. Okay, the next part, I'm going to introduce the technique of squaring both sides. Taking square roots both sides. Okay, so in this question here, my subject is X. So my subject is X. My subject is hidden in the bracket. So some students will be, oh, my subject is hidden in the bracket. I'm going to do my algebra expansion. Okay, so for anyone who's trying to do an algebra expansion, you apply your A minus B formula. So if you are thinking along this line, you're actually not wrong. Particularly if you expand correctly. So for you, right, if let's say you think about the expansion, you are actually not wrong, but you find that your subject is very spread out. You find that your subject is very spread out. There will be an x squared, there will be an x. So if you have gone on for the expansion, you realize that it's so difficult to make x the subject. So when it's not possible to expand out, then of course the alternative is don't expand out. Don't go and expand out. It just make your subject manipulation difficult. So in fact, right, you square root both sides. Because when you take square roots both sides, you remove the square. So the square disappear. Your subject is here. And the manipulation is quite easy. So just bring it over. And you got a px. So this is your subject. Your subject that you need to isolate. So in this case, you will divide by p on both sides. So you divide by p so that you can isolate your subject. And this is my answer. And you check out your answer. There is no x in your answer. Okay, so this is just very instinctive if you have the technical or the algebra technique. If your algebra technique is strong. But it's like you realize you just keep shuffling here and there. But you must always shuffle with proper technique, not anyhow technique. Okay, so in these two more advanced example, it is a square both sides and square root both sides, which is very challenging for some students. Okay, example 4, we are showing you an exam question. Okay, example 4, exam questions is something, this one I think very close to a O-level question. So they gave you a formula. So the formula is started off with V as a subject. Okay. And then later on, I'm supposed to make R the subject. So R will be my subject. So make sure I do not have R. Okay, but in this case, part A is something like a giveaway. So part A is like a giveaway. They ask you to find the value of V. If R has a certain value, H has a certain value, pi has a certain value. So in this kind of question, right, you just plug the value in. So you just plug the value in, and then you just punch calculator. So basically this one is no trick. Okay, but sometimes they might give you values and then you might need to manipulate a bit. Okay, so maybe I can change the question to something like calculate the value of H if, let's say, pi is 22/7 and volume is 30, and then R is 4.7. So if the question is like this, okay, you just do accordingly. Just insert the volume that is given to you. So let me show you here. So you just insert, and then you got a pi. Your pi is 22/7. Then you got a R square. Then sorry, I got no space. Then you times H. So what you can do is you can punch out the calculator here. Punch out the calculator. 1/3 times 22/7 times 4.7 squared. Okay, you can just punch a calculator. Okay, in this case, the punching will give you not very nice answer. So it will give you something like this. So you might as well just divide everything over. So you just punch calculator and you just divide. So sometimes they might give you values that require you to insert the values and do some manipulation. Okay, so last part here, we're going to make R the subject. So if you got a fraction here, you might want to multiply 3 on both sides. So some of you will feel better if you multiply 3 on both sides. And then you divide the thing over, you divide the pi over, you divide the h over, and you're left with a R squared. So this is the part you're going to take square roots on both sides. Okay, so I need to bring you to bring your attention. When you take square roots on both sides, usually there's a plus minus. So when you take square root on both sides, there's usually a plus minus. So in the previous one, okay, by right there's a plus minus, but I didn't want to confuse you first. So I will just show the taking square root idea. So in a typical one, there is a plus minus. Okay, so why is there a plus minus? So think about it in this way. Think about something like x squared is equal to 16. When you take square roots on both sides, why will you have two answers? So I got a 4, I also got a -4. Okay, the reason why we can have two answers is because 4 square will give you a positive 16. -4 square will also give you a positive 16. So there are two possible answers that can give you a 16. So when you take square root, there must be a plus minus. Okay, so these are the more difficult one, but it's still quite manageable, I feel. Okay, so the more difficult technique I would say is square both sides or square root both sides. And sometimes you are given values for manipulation as well.